Every time I hear the opening lines to the Gospel of John, my mind returns to a lecture that I heard while I was at Vanderbilt Divinity School by Dr. Susan Thistlethwaite. Thistlethwaite is a theologian and scholar from Chicago Theological Seminary. And when she spoke at Vandy, she shared about her upcoming research turned book called Adam, Eve, and the Human Genome. The Human Genome Project was a big deal in the late 90s and early 2000s. You may remember from science class that genome sequencing is figuring out the order of the DNA bases that make up us and all living things. These bases are really only 4 letters, A, C, G, and T. But when strung together over 3 billion times, make up an organism's DNA. While I'll spare everyone the details about her thesis on the ethical theology of such a project, what I remember most vividly is her connecting the idea of how our genetic code, when strung together, is a communication tool. It is a sort of mimetic device that informs how something is created. And she reminded us that in a world where we try to keep religion and science separate, perhaps the Gospel of John was onto something. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. These opening lines of the Gospel of John is a description of how the Word became flesh, how God became incarnate in human form through Christ. It is a most beautiful and poetic birth account. Even if you don't like the Gospel of John, and let's face it, John has its problems, you gotta love this opening. It's not like the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke that give a storyline and a character account of Mary and Joseph. This account is like an abstract painting. And you can see the allusions to grace and to truth and to light and to flesh. Yes, flesh. Our anxiety-ridden, stress-producing flesh. Incarnate to human form, a form that doesn't always work, that's prone to cancer and knee replacements and broken bones and hair loss. And a question raised by Lutheran minister Nadia Bolz-Weber, no self-respecting God would become a human when being human means being irretrievably fragile. What can it mean that God slipped into vulnerability of skin and was made flesh? Seems like a lousy idea in a way, given the very sloppy and broken reality of our physical lives as humans. Our bodies bruise and decay and sag insistently toward the earth. So why in the world would God not spare God's self the indignity of having things like sweat glands and hiccups? We too easily forget that we are made in God's image. We are made in God's image, and God called it good. In a world where we are constantly reminded of what we are not thin enough, not smart enough, not good enough, not pretty enough, not strong enough, not rich enough. The psalmist reminds us that God knit us together in our mother's wombs, and that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. when the world is becoming too much and we wonder if we are enough, we can remember that we are made in the image of God, and God called it good. Not perfect, but good. So Jesus came, and in his almost disturbingly physical existence showed us what God looks like. Not in some ethereal, alternate spiritual plane, but right here in our midst of our physical, embodied, earthly reality. Jesus said, here is what being born of God looks like. It looks like not worrying about what we're going to eat or drink. It feels like touching human flesh as if it's holy instead of worrying if it is unclean. It tastes like breaking bread and drinking wine with all the wrong people. Perhaps we need this gentle reminder as we enter a new year. As we pressure ourselves to make ridiculous resolutions that we can't keep, or set lofty expectations that this year has to be so much better than last year. May we remember that we are made in the image of God, that we are born of God, and we are enough. As we enter a new year, and before we let Christmas get too far behind us, let us remember the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. As we are given grace upon grace to become children of God, and perhaps in doing so, we move our flesh to become Word. A word for a hurting and broken and beautiful world. You, as Christ's body, are no longer about the fear or the denial of death, but about life and life abundant. You, as Christ's body, are becoming flesh-made Word, being made into God's loving intention for the world God created. Happy New Year.